Today's Mind the Chat is about Volvo Groups, and I have the pleasure to have with me today the Senior Innovation Manager, Vishnu Rajanikanth. Hi, Vishnu.
Hello, Alberto. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. The reason of this conversation is to dive a bit into what Volvo Group is doing, and specifically to go even deeper on probably one of the last move that Volvo Group has done in terms of innovation, that is the Campex, that raised a lot of attention either from the media or from the people that are involved in open innovation. We would like a very, very interesting and novel approach. And so before starting, Vishnu, I will think it might be very beneficial for our audience to get a sense a bit what is Volvo Group is about.
Sure. Volvo Group is a multinational company dealing with providing infrastructure and transport solutions to various verticals. You could think of logistics, you could think of mining, construction, etc., etc. And by infrastructure and transport solutions, I mean products such as trucks, construction equipment, engines, and services related to it, services enabled by connectivity, and also other services that are more related to maintenance and service of these equipment. So that's the core of who we are. And I must say, just to clarify, we are not in the business of cars. That's a different business entity by itself. Volvo Group, like I said, is a fairly large company. We are present in 190 countries. We have production facilities in about 18 different countries. And in 2019, we had an annual revenue in excess of $50 billion, to give you a reference to the size of the company. And we are, like I said, in the transport and the infrastructure solution area. So our vision is for a safer, cleaner, and more productive and efficient transport and infrastructure segment. So that's what we sort of aim towards.
And the last sentence triggers the discussion on the big topic of today, that is innovation. And as you know, innovation is changing, is continually evolving. Now, actually, we are talking even more from research and development. We are moving into innovation, and more specifically to open innovation. And open innovation, being quite a recent and continually evolving trends, is something that include multiple potential approaches. We typically use this framework to try to capture. Actually, we change it every 2-3 months because, again, as mentioned, it's a very, very dynamic arena. But we use this framework for trying to capture what are the potential multiple alternative approaches that corporates, particularly large corporates, are adopting today to engaging with innovation coming from outside, innovation coming from startups. And there is something ranging from trying to capturing the trend through what are called outpost innovation antennas, working with the employees in a novel way, also trying to involved and also in this new way of doing things. This is what is today is called entrepreneurship, up to the concept of innovation labs, venture builders, startup studios, accelerators, working with startups, and on, moving to the venture client, meaning partnership with startups, up to investing into startups through a dedicated vehicle, a corporate venture capital, or off balance, up to the last act, that is an acquisition, when something is has a pretty strong strategic fit and alignment. So I will use it, Vishnu, this framework as, again, something to potentially to try to understand what Volvo Group as an entity is approaching, and before entering into the more detailed discussion of today, that is Campex.
Sure. If I look at the framework and reflect a little bit, I think we have come quite a way along this journey as Volvo Group, I would say. We have different innovation touch points towards the ecosystem around us, towards open innovation, if I can call it that. But to us, centrally, open innovation is about a certain need or a gap that we foresee, that we have in terms of where we want to be, either in terms of capabilities or services and products, etc. And open innovation then acts as a solution to help fill those gaps through partnerships and collaborations with entities out there in the ecosystem. And it can mean a lot of different things. Startups, tech startups is of course is something that comes clearly to mind, and we do quite a lot of that. And we also work with SMEs and sometimes even more larger companies in strategic partnerships. Uh, Also, we have the public funding approach, or the working with authorities and the government as well, because some of what we do is sort of impacting the society at large as well. So in our mind, open innovation is broadly that, but centered around our needs and gaps, and of course involves all of these different points that you highlight in terms of venture client or innovation lab, and also the CVC, because we've had a venture capital arm for quite a few years now, and we have been quite active there as well. So I think we kind of you will find us across that spectrum
Yes.
in your framework.
That is pretty typical for large entities. But now let's focus on CampX. That has been probably the most recent action that you have taken. And again, when we look at CampX, on the one hand, it looks like what it might be called an innovation hub, but it also looks like it might be a bridge or the way to empower what is called the venture client model, potentially also venture builder. So can you help us understand a bit better about CampX, and specifically what has been the genesis of CampX? How did you arrive to something like that? How it was originally planned, and how it also evolved? Because I think in between also happened something called COVID-19 that sometimes reshape a bit the plans of everybody, not just yours.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said earlier, if you look at the transport and the infrastructure space as such, and all the different verticals that we are looking into, one thing is fairly clear, that a lot of things are changing and have to change if we have to sort of have a cleaner transport system, for example, have a fossil-free transport system, and if we have to have safer and more productive transport systems as well. So if you look at this particular piece, the things that come to your mind are, electrification of transport, autonomous driving capabilities, and the things that connectivity and AI bring in terms of the ability to digitize and make things more productive. So these opportunities are around. A lot of things are changing. The speed with which things change are quite different from what it has been before. So that's the sort of origination of why we want to do something like a Campex. We need to sort of develop this arena or a hub where we can, in a good way, very efficient way, collaborate with different ecosystem players, provide a platform where we can sort of bring this Volvo expertise, and also the capabilities that Volvo brings in terms of execution. We are a fairly large company, like I said before, and what we do really well, one of the things that we do really well is execute and deliver scale on the businesses that we currently run. So we have a lot of expertise on how you can scale up, how you can reach customers and develop a business. But then what the startup ecosystem and the external ecosystem brings is this specific capabilities in these new areas, and a focus, because they are fairly small, nimble, and agile. They move much faster. So Campex, I would say, is a sort of a meeting place for these complementary capabilities to come together, and we hope they can come together like a proof of value, creating a proof of value, which will help us also assess how good we are to each other in terms of meeting our goals. And then that gives a very good way to then discuss how do we scale up, if we want to scale up or not, and those kind of discussions. So I would characterize Campex innovation hub or an arena with a strong focus on developing partnerships through pilots. And the genesis is essentially to focus on these areas that I outlined: electrification, autonomous connectivity, and AI, and to sort of unleash the impact of combining Volvo's scale with the agility and specific capabilities of startups and other players in the ecosystem.
A couple of questions that pop up to my mind. Number one, I think it was originally designed as a physical arena, and currently, so how much has changed in the vision? So it's in Gothenburg, right? Technically.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it started in Gothenburg. Now we have now announced that there will also be another CampX center in India, in Bangalore as well. So there is, of course, the physical place, and it's fairly important. One of the things that that drive the speed and agility is sort of co-locating experts on Volvo and the business people who have the need and the startups in one place, so we can sort of drive the speed into these pilots. And there's a lot of value in being able to do that. But we would also like to work with, we are not limited to the ecosystem in Sweden or in Gothenburg or any place that CampX is situated. So of course we are already working quite a lot, even before the coronavirus, to leverage on the digital capabilities in being able to collaborate across different geographies. So that's always been on the card, but it has become the mainstay because of Corona. I think nowadays depending on how the restrictions are going, you don't have a lot of people at Volvo as well. They're all working from home, especially in these areas, because you can work from home as such. So I think coronavirus has had an impact. Of course, we've become better, I think, at prioritizing and focusing on what needs we would like to really focus on, rather than taking a really broad blue sky approach. But again, in terms of how we work with the collaborations, has had sort of not a huge impact, because we've been able to fall back on the digital ways of working together. So I think we have sort of pulled through so far, at least.
Yeah. Second question is what are the typical ideal candidates? Are you looking for startup? You're looking what are called scale-ups, a bit more mature? Again, working with large corporation, in our experience, typically requires companies that are already a bit structured, not just something that might be moved into deployment into a reasonable time frame, not something that is too early. So what is your typical target?
It's a good question. If you look at CampX as such, I mean, maybe I should start with Volvo Group. CampX is one of the sort of innovation arenas, touch points, interfaces in this really big Volvo Group, and we have been working with innovation from quite a long time. And I guess you know about the safe seat belt and all those things, which goes back many decades, which sort of originated in Volvo. So we have a strong legacy of that. We also recently, if you've seen CES, we demonstrated the automated docking through our business unit Volvo Penta. So we've been quite active in coming out with innovations to market, and that's the sort of legacy we have, and that's what we focus on. So within the Volvo Group, I would say that we handle the entire range of working with a really small startup to really big companies who have matured and scaled up. So that's the first thing to sort of talk about. And now if we zoom into CampX as such, in CampX, the idea for us is the beginning of the journey is the need and the gap that we see that is strategically required to be filled, or sometimes even more midterm and short term. And then we don't really want to rule out at that stage that we will only work with a scale up or a startup. And you're very right when you say that as Volvo Group, we are geared up quite well to work with the large players. We've been doing that forever, I would say. What is sort of missing a little bit is when you work with SMEs and startups. As a startup, you can get lost in this big company, and we don't really have procedures sometimes. Maybe the procedures work against the smaller companies because we have a fairly different yardstick, you can say. So in Campex, what we are trying to do, what we are doing is to act as an accelerator when it comes to the smaller companies, startups, and SMEs. We can sort of bring them in and set up this proof of value. So we have we have established, and this process has been running now, a very light way of handling these engagements, especially when we set up a proof of value. We've also developed sort of this experimental space or a sandbox or whatever you want to call that, which is quite different from say the rest of the Volvo Group, because it allows us to work with um, I mean, the ideas and the products a lot of times are there, but maybe it is looking for a market. So in that sense, it has not, you couldn't call that as a scale up. So
Yeah.
we've had companies who are startups in the real sense also working with us, because we provide this ability to onboard them and get them to connected to the right parts in the organization, set up the proof of value, and even in many ways bring different kinds of funding to kind of run these programs to a point where we can validate if this is worth scaling up. So what we do within Campex is we become like we sort of specialize in getting the SMEs and startups to sort of work with us and collaborate with us much more easily. But as Volvo Group, of course, we will work with all kinds of partners. And you would have seen quite a lot in the news as well that we have partnerships moving in from all directions, so to speak. You have the SMEs and startups, and you have large corporations. Like we recently announced a joint venture with Daimler, for example, on the fuel cell sector. So it's a little bit driven by what's the best solution for a given context or an opportunity.
As part of your mission of driving startups into Volvo Group and potentially initiating collaboration with the different business areas. I think, if I can remember, one of the differentiators is that you also put together a sort of fast track, fast lane for onboarding these startups without having to sign 55 pages long contract and going after multiple requirements that typically are one of the initial obstacles for collaborating. What's the approach over there?
Yeah, I think what we're doing there is to first of all set up a fast lane, like you say, and essentially what it means is answering the question of how do we govern these initiatives in a different way than what we do normally. I think that governance of such initiatives a lot of times adds a lot of layers, and it can slow things down. And also maybe it is a lot of baggage for a smaller company to carry through this process. So when we say we set up a fast lane, we actually sort of try to create a very strong interface between the entity or the product owner or business owner who has the need, and provide a direct interface to the capabilities that we have outside. We also sort of have set up a way to handle IP, which is normally also a reason why things sometimes get really slow. And the way we do that is exactly by creating this proof of value space or experimental phase where we can we do enough to sort of cover concerns on both sides and try to create a win-win for the proof of value. But we sort of any decision that is important to be solved when the question of scaling up comes, we are able to sort of hold back on that. at this present moment when we start the proof of value. So we believe that a lot of such discussions are very valuable when you do it after a proof of value, because you have the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, rather than doing a lot of paper exercise or exercise on the board trying to nail everything, and sometimes that takes too long. So essentially what we do is to sort of fast track the proof of value by a light partnership contract, decent enough but not like a super detailed IP analysis. But by doing these, we are able to sort of get to a point where we can define and run a proof of value. So that's how I think we fast
How
track
long
this.
is this light contract?
Our aim is to sort of try to get an outcome in 6 months, but of course some of them depending on the maturity, because sometimes you have a level of technical validation and then you also have some amount of business validation to be done, so it could stretch to 8 months or even a little bit more, but we target around 6 months, I would say,
For
if I
the proof of value length. No, I was referring to the length of the contract. How many pages? Because this is the benchmarking analysis I'm doing across the industry.
Yeah, I think it's I honestly I have not really counted it so much, but I would say it is not more than 10 in some cases, which can be fairly tech heavy, and we know that we are dealing with a fairly mature company, or the offer is very clear, then we can run into 20 sheets and stuff like that, but it's not 50 sheets at all, like you said.
No, because the benchmark on the market currently is 3 pages. This is the
Ah,
best that I found. That there I have
okay.
on 7, 8. You're probably ranking in the podium again if you stay
But
below.
if you put it that way, I think we are probably on the main collaboration contract like 3 pages, but then you may have a couple of appendix, what is the outcome of the project and things like that.
Yes, cool. No, that's fine. And no, I think it's a good approach to try to hold back the key digital decision as much as possible. Obviously, talking about IPs is a controversial matter, and so sometimes startups want to be protected, you want to be protected, and that's one typically might be the discussion. But the logic behind try to defer to when we have something substantial to be discussed, the critical decision is the principle that should rule this way of initial engagement with startups. Going back to my list of questions that are popping up as you speak, the third one is you're looking for startups through batches? Is a continuum? You have always an open door for interesting project? You launch challenges? How do you interact with the startup world?
Yeah. So when it comes to this, again, like with everything else I've been saying, we start with developing a landscape of needs. So we kind of look at the important priorities that we have, the areas in which we really have identified that partnerships and startups and SMEs can really help. We kind of create a landscape of that, or a library of such things, you would say, and out of that you get priorities, because there may be 20 things there, but we know that we want to sort of tackle the top 5, let's say. That's always the first thing that we do in the process. And we ourselves are not today running batches or programs directly. We are collaborating with, for example, Mobility X Lab, which is based here in Gothenburg, and Volvo Group is also one of the co-founding entities for this.
Ericsson, if I can remember right.
It is.
Ericsson probably also involved.
Yeah, Ericsson, Volvo Cars, and the Volvo Group are involved, among others, I think. And then we can use, in this case, Mobility X Lab then as a partner to go and scout and sort of find these interesting startups to bring on the table to address this need. And then we also have like Drive Israel now, Drive Tel Aviv, which is another partner of ours, who do similar things, but they're probably more focused on Israel and maybe the US. So that's one way. So we use our partners in this space to be able to scout for good companies. But that's not the only way. We also have, like, a lot of times we've been able to sort of, without a lot of scouting work, arrive at maybe two or three companies that are interesting, because we have a lot of expertise within the Volvo Group also in terms of assessing what sort of capability or startups is really interesting in this space. So that's more ad hoc, but we do that as well. So I would say that we tend to look at the need and the gap, and then we do what is most appropriate for it. So right now, if we have something that we think we cannot use the current approaches, and we need to do, let's say, hypothetically, I'm saying a challenge or something like that, we would be open to do that. So we are for using all the tools that's available, but based on what makes sense for that context.
And again, so you have an ongoing process of scouting. It's obviously need-driven based on the landscape of needs that you put together, I believe, on a recurring way through your dialogue with the business areas. Then you go outside through multiple partners, sometimes directly. I assume that you are looking at the world and not just on specific geographies for identifying the potential solution. When you find a solution, there is an onboard, meaning you seek with them to identify and design what is the agreement that will bring to the proof of value. And then you start working on this specific proof of value that we say there's a typical average length of 6 months, might take a bit longer if there is also beyond technical validation, so business validation. And at the end, what is the outcome of this collaboration? And what is hand over to the business unit, spin-off, both? How does it work?
Yeah. I think, again, that's a very interesting area on how you scale things up. When you do a proof of value, a lot of times, I mean, it's not all the time that you say that you want to scale up. So there are some cases where you would probably say that it's maybe not mature enough to do something now, or you kind of hold back for other reasons. Maybe it didn't really even succeed sometimes. But when you know that here is an opportunity or a need that we have applied some co-creation with a startup or an SME, and it seems to be really interesting, we need to take it forward. We always, based on the context here, can sort of create the necessary impetus within the mainstream of Volvo Group. Like, we can onboard them as a partner in a more long-term contract, you can say. And we do this for a lot of technical capabilities that the startups bring on board, because it's fairly easy to put them through the track of commercialization that we already have. And in this case, it could be going in as a component or of a product or a service we already have out there. And that's a straightforward approach, because we are not really changing the business model at the customer side. We have a channel that works well. We have a platform which takes this startup feature or product in. So that's fairly straightforward. But there are situations as well where we might want to try limited commercialization, because the business model maybe is different. We have to sort of understand a little bit more on how to grow such a business. It's probably adjacent to what we do, of course, but not sort of a very well-known animal as such from a commercialization standpoint. And then we have the option of fast tracking, as we call it, such initiatives. So We will, of course, closely work with the business owner for such an area, but we can sort of do limited launch or limited commercialization to take it a little bit further. Uh, so essentially this becomes a little bit like a step 2 to
It's
decide before it
a
becomes.
follow-up proof of value. It's an extended
Yeah,
proof of
yeah, yeah.
value.
Yeah, you can say that, but it is more not just proof of value, because we hope to then have a paying customer, and we are trying to prove this in a 100% customer setting. And because it's a new business model, it'll also give us opportunities to learn on our side, on the commercial side as well. That's
So
one
sort
thing.
of proof of commercialization, let's call it
Yeah,
that way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You could you could call that.
The only problem
There
that proof
is,
of commercialization side like POC, and then you go back to proof of concept. But still, beyond
yeah,
that, we got it. We got it. I think it's step
yeah.
2.
I think, yeah, what we have also learned, I think, is to sort of stay away from all these jargons a bit, because it has so many different meanings already. Sometimes it confuses you more than giving clarity. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that's one route. The spin-off part that you were talking about is also interesting. uh, and here, of course, like for the Horizon 3 or maybe even Horizon 2 sort of businesses, which which might mean that they don't fit perfectly with what's going on today, but they are strategically important, and we would like to sort of provide some amount of flexibility and freedom to see if it can sustain as a business. So we have the possibility of the spin-off route as well, and that's also fairly interesting from an employee perspective at Volvo Group as well. Like, we have a lot of really talented colleagues at Volvo Group, and they have great ideas on how they could actually uh, solve a business problem or a customer problem. And a lot of times it could make sense that we sort of spin it off, still protecting the Volvo Group's interest in the long run. So that option is also available.
So that means that you, as Campex, also work as a sort of follow-up of internal employee-led innovation, entrepreneurship initiative, in a way, the one that brings to potential valuable results. Campex is the place when they got to the point that you can decide if it makes sense to spin off them and over to the business unit. You're
Yeah,
also as a sort of incubator for these
yeah.
internal initiated initiatives. Is that
Yeah,
way?
you could say that, but however, we retain a lot of focus on the kind of needs or the gaps that we would like to kind of solve. So I think we stick to that brief quite a lot, because we believe strongly that'll help us focus and also validate these things fairly quickly. Uh, so what you said is right, but still within this context.
The reason of my question is because one of the trends that we are seeing on the market is that the
Mm,
so-called entrepreneurship program
yeah,
aimed
yeah,
at stimulating, innovating ideas from employees are now becoming more and more platform open, not just to employees but also to external startups. Meaning,
mm,
you launch a challenge, and you launch a challenge at the same time internally and externally, and then they
yeah,
become also potential deal flow of new ideas that at a certain point require also uh, follow-up action by typically driven what is called innovation factory venture builders that needs to help them to understand if this potential idea has the ability and the capacity to move to the next steps, and the next steps might be something that might be incubated internally or spun out, as we discussed. And so that's I
yeah.
was trying to understand if there is something similar also inside Volvo groups, how it's structured, or is just mostly unstructured, and you.
I would say it is. I mean, it's definitely there, but it starts with the need and gap. And I think the whole idea of combining these unique strengths, like I said, for example, we have this sort of story that we talk about quite a lot within our team. Um, when we did collaborate with one of the startups here, you could kind of see that like an employee in a large company and an employee from a startup, they they bring in different complementary capabilities, but also it's I mean the differences extend to many soft factors as well. I think we had one startup
Flash, of
here
course,
who,
yes.
yeah, all the Volvo employees were like in the big company attire, and and you will see the startup coming in, and I thought for a minute they were actually a rock band or something with headbands. And so I think there is a lot of value in connecting the entrepreneurs with the startup community. So in a way, we believe in bringing this complementary nature together, and we do it with the focus on solving a particular need or gap. But in the process, when we look at what to do with this next step, it may so happen that we want to sort of spin off. So what we are doing is we are looking at the case and doing what we think is the right thing to do there, rather than starting like a challenge and say that this is like a entrepreneurship challenge, for example. So we don't really have a platform or a challenge as such, but we have the tool and the means to be able to apply that where we think it is necessary.
It's more an opportunistic decision that you
Yeah,
take
yeah,
based on the specific situation. You figure out what is the best possible follow-up
yeah,
action to be taken. That might be hand
yeah,
over to the business unit or spin-off or something else. Got it.
yeah, yeah.
Can you bring a couple of examples of successful collaboration, if any, that you had that you can share, just to help us to understand how did it work?
Yeah, I think quite a lot of the collaborations that we have ongoing, and like that it's we have started up fairly recently, so I probably can't talk about the details as much, but
Yeah.
I can talk about one collaboration because I think it gives a flavor of things and it's public. And this has to do with electrification. Electrification of heavy duty trucks is fairly challenging for a lot of reasons. One of them is the charging infrastructure, of course, because it is one thing when we talk about electrification of cars. A lot of people who own electric cars will have a charger at home. Maybe they have a charger at office. It sorts out, I think, much better. But when you have a really large piece of equipment which is doing business critical functions, already today with the diesel engine, it is of utmost importance for our customers that the trucks are running when they need it. Downtime is a big killer for our customers. And then we introduced the variability of electricity as well. And then it sort of it's not just about Volvo Group making really good electric trucks. It's also about how the ecosystem around evolves, right? The charging infrastructure. So in that sense, the Volvo Lights project that we have started in the US, in California, is a great example of how we've been able to orchestrate the ecosystem there a little bit. Uh, so if you look at the example of port drayage, transporting in and out of ports in the California area, that's the region where this project is now running. It addresses a lot of questions holistically, which means that what's the charging infrastructure like? How can we kind of provide the productivity gains that the ports really need to be competitive? How can the transport service providers still be solvent and flourish in their business even when they move to electricity? And how can we provide the people who live in this area with a much cleaner and much less noisy transport solution, and how can this also address local concerns around jobs, etc. So I think this whole example is where we have pieced together, worked with different ecosystem players, and developed this project to address all of these concerns. So that's one example that's out there in the public, the Volvo Lights. It's a great example of how you could drive EV adoption. And there are like elements of it on the technical side that, of course, we can address with collaborations with startups, etc. But that's one thing I can talk about on how to drive the transformation. And I think something like a Campex then enables different parts of such an initiative.
No, I think it's a good reference also to visualize what can be
Yeah.
potential the outcomes of such work. Just to conclude our conversation, what are the, let's say, the top 3 tips that you can provide to your innovation peers that are about to design, about to launch a similar initiative, or at least the 3 things that you believe has helped you to develop, and what you think should be the priority in designing initiative for collaborating with startups?
Yeah, I think uh, one of the first things is to sort of what has worked well for us, I think, is to keep the customer focus a little bit, to sort of try to evaluate opportunities based on the kind of impact it will make to the end customer and the business, and use that as a guiding light. I think that has helped giving priorities and focus quite much better. Otherwise, something like an open innovation may suffer from spreading too thin, because there are so many things you can do, uh, and you may just get lost in all of that. So I think that's one thing. And the other thing is also to sort of have a very good understanding of what the startups really need in the space that you're working with. What are the key challenges to be able to integrate the collaboration and solve those parts? For example, if it's about a light partnership agreement, or if it's about trying to create some amount of financial stability for the startup through funding, etc., whatever it be, trying to sort of address that so you have some stability and continuity, because you could do a lot of proof of values and POCs and not be able to scale if you don't have this view. And the last one, I think equally important, it's not last in any way, is to learn by doing, because what you do in terms of the process or an approach, or even your strategy on how you go about doing this, is an assumption in the first place. And you could be tempted to sort of run with it for too long. So it's always good to sort of know that it's an assumption and be very ready to chop and change things, and not get too fixated upon the beauty of the theoretical flow, if I can say. I think that has been something that has helped us, because it what the idea with which you start, whether it's even the sort of need that you want to fulfill, or the solution, is never the same at the end of it. Same thing applies for an open innovation as well. You have to be agile in that as well.
I really like the last point, that I think is very, very true. Is there something that you originally designed in CampX at the beginning, and down the way we find out that was not working?
I think we have learned quite a lot on how to make the governance quite light, how important it is to sort of push some of the decisions that we were maybe trying hard to solve much before. And I think we've gotten the support from the different stakeholders as well to be able to move things around quite a bit. I think that has helped a lot. That has been one thing. And the other thing is also on We have tried different flavors of what you showed in the landscape, but we have learned that we should not sort of maybe just get fixated on the entrepreneurship approach, because when you do that quite a lot, the message that you kind of send and the kind of outcomes that you are able to generate would become very difficult to control and match with what exactly is the need. So we have sort of experimented with I would say different things, and now we are looking at, let's, if this is where we want to be X years from now, and these are the challenges and gaps we see to get there, let's keep that as the starting point, and then we have flexibility with other things. So it's important, we have learned that it's important to anchor yourself on one thing, because that actually gives you flexibility on many other things.
Yes, again, going back to the wisdom is not having a plan is doesn't work, but being too strict to the plan, particularly in this world, is something that typically doesn't produce that many results, because everything is changing, and the learning that you accrue down the way is so big and so powerful that you cannot ignore. Okay, I think, Vishnu, thank you very much for this conversation, and looking forward to monitor the progress that Campex is doing, and probably having a future follow-up to understand what you have reached, what you have done, what has been furtherly evolved, in a way that we can learn even more from your experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alberto. Thank you for having me and the Volvo Group in this channel. Thanks.